to the Fintech Atlas by Financial IT. Today I'm speaking with Ez Britton, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Centre of Financial Innovation and Technology in London. Ez, thank you for joining us today. Could you begin the interview by briefly explaining what is CFIT and what it does for the benefit of people who are watching this but who are not familiar with the organisation?
Hi, so absolute pleasure to be with you today. I'm Ez. So CFIT, Centre Finance Innovation Technology. We're an independent change maker that sits that intersection between policymakers, regulators, industry, and academia, with a core mandate to bring the ecosystem together to solve those big barriers and challenges facing financial services technology, and really drive forwards industry-led innovation. And that's our core focus. And over the last year, we've been working with 60 organizations from across the financial services ecosystem, covering banks, fintechs, CRAs, universities, big tech, the list goes on, trade bodies and the rest, to solve one of the most pressing problems of this generation of fintech innovators that I personally believe really is that it's the next frontier of digital innovation in this space, and that's access to data. And so what we were looking at was very much how could open finance positively impact the lives of SMEs and consumers in the UK, and why was that so important, and what would the actual impact be of doing this? So how do we then leverage that to go from open banking to open finance to smart data?
Okay, so open finance is essentially like open banking, where the players have access to data and can innovate on the basis of that, but it's different because it doesn't just relate to banking, it relates to all other financial activities.
Exactly that. So it's about that wider realm of financial data about you. So it's not just about your bank account transactions, your credit card transactions, but that wider data set that encompasses your investments, your pensions, buy now, pay later, local council tax, insurance, all these different things that you do, all these services that you either purchase, buy, or engage with in some way that inform that financial picture about yourself.
Excellent. I know you've had some recent successes on that. Could you please tell us a bit about what CFIT has achieved in the last year or so?
Yeah, so in late February, we published our blueprint report on open finance, summarizing the findings and recommendations from our industry-wide coalition of, as I said, over 60 leading organizations. And through the key proofs of concepts created by the coalition, we've definitively proven the case for driving forwards the open finance agenda. And in addition to that, laying out next steps for industry, government, and regulators to drive this forwards. So building on this achievement, this week at IFGS, or last week, we were really excited to announce progress on the recommendations made in our blueprint report back in February, and our mission to solving these key barriers to innovation in the UK. And one of our coalition's key recommendations was to establish a task force to build on the foundational work that we did in prioritizing use cases and the required data sets and those APIs that would be needed to really enable that implementation. And we were really pleased to see, as announced by the Economic Secretary to the Treasury on last Monday, that we have now launched that Open Finance Task Force, which will be an industry-led initiative, which will build on our work by exploring and providing key recommendations to government on how financial data can be safely unlocked to improve SMEs' access to credit. And that inaugural task force meeting was held on day 2 of IFGS last week, and we're delighted that that task force will be actually driven by CFIT, with our chair, Charlotte Croswell OBE, serving as the chair. And on top of that, we can also share some updates on our activities to turn the proofs of concepts that we built into working prototypes. And we also announced 2 trial initiatives specifically Citizens Advice and CFIT will deliver some initial industry-driven pilots with Experian in Citizens Advice Stoke and North Tyneside, in addition to the pilots already completed by Peridata and PayPoint in Stockport, Oldham, Rochdale and Trafford. And these pilots will really enhance the help available to vulnerable consumers by empowering Citizens Advice teams to speedily and securely access financial data with clients' consent and advise in their critical financial needs. SME lenders, so this is the last one, SME lenders, including Barclays, will also be looking at implementing open finance solutions that will accelerate SME credit assessment and loan decision-making, which builds off of the really successful pilot analysis that we did in HSBC that demonstrated that accessing new data sets and auto-populating business loan applications could lead to a significant boost in lending decisions, helping to close that £22 billion funding gap.
That sounds very exciting. What at what time or scale do you envisage will be? What's the time frame we're talking about before people who go to can go to the Citizen Advice Bureau and use your solutions, or SMEs can gain from the lending solutions you've come up with?
So there's a number of things in that. So Citizens Advice are looking to roll out this pilot over the coming months and expand that to a few more of so they have 8 to 9 contact centres across the UK. We'll be rolling out pilots in a couple and then expanding that later on in the year with a view towards supporting their activities to actually do a national rollout in the coming, well, I think next year is when they would love to see that happen. So again, this is the pilot activity. We'll see what happens as they push that through. But that's the key point. As we explore on the SME work with HSBC, with Barclays, and the rest, the initial position is to continue to see what data sets are important and the impact that they actually have on their lending decisions, and then work with industry to open those up. This is why the task force is going to work on a very specific time schedule, and it will be reporting back to Treasury by the end of June with its recommendations on dataset prioritization, API prioritization, and potential commercial models, so that can feed into the new work stream coming from the future entity that will be responsible for open finance going forward, and ultimately build into the smart data roadmap that was launched last Thursday.
Yes. When we spoke last year, you identified 5 major challenges which you would be working to overcome. And some of those challenges have featured in our discussion over the last few minutes, which you've explained what's been happening and what will happen. If I could quickly run through each of the challenges, could you apply a number as to how serious you think that challenge is? And I appreciate that they may all be very important. We've got a numerical scale. 0 is no problem at all. 1 is a minor problem. 2 is minor but manageable. 3 is medium size. 4 is serious, and 5 is huge. So 0 is not really a problem at all, and 5 is huge or very serious. The first challenge we discussed last time was regulations and how regulators are struggling to keep up with actual development in fintech. If you had to give a number to that problem, what number would it be?
Well, I think firstly, it won't surprise you that none of them are getting a 0, right? So that's but regulations, I'd say a 4. I mean, UK financial regulators' willingness to embrace and regulate previously unknown technology and set new standards has been a really important contributor to the success of the UK fintech sector to date. And that same willingness will be a success for open finance. In fact, the FCA were a major supporter of our work and will also be an observer of the task force going forwards. But nonetheless, striking the appropriate balance between consumer safeguards and technological innovation, it's an ongoing process, and it requires constant input from industry to avoid new ideas and products being stymied by regulation.
Yes.
In the UK, the JROC, the Joint Regulatory Oversight Committee, has an extensive program that will move open back and forwards. And I believe we have the opportunity to build on these foundations with open finance, with the intention being to create a long-term regulatory framework based on the DPDI, so Digital Data Protection, Digital Information Bill. And then ultimately, we need to see that new body established to take the work forwards, which is happening with the future entity.
Yes.
And as I said, we can share the launch of the Open Finance Task Force, which is an industry-led initiative that will build on our work. But ultimately, I think the most important thing here is the regulators are coming around the table to support the activity of industry-led innovation. We had both the PSR and the FCA attend our task force meeting last Tuesday, not as core contributors, but as observers to both give their support to the work whilst giving industry the freedom to actually drive forwards innovation.
Great. Thank you. Challenge number 2 is funding. Some fintech entrepreneurs lack access to the capital that they need.
Yeah, I mean, this is a hard one. Is it a 3? I'd say a 3/4. I think financial services industry is a large and important contributor to UK GDP, and fintech specifically is one of the most important growth sectors of the UK economy. I firmly believe that. And we need to focus on and proactively support the UK fintech sector by removing those obstacles to further growth and encouraging targeted investment in the areas which this truly matters. Interestingly, the UK fintech industry still remains very commonly associated with, I don't think anyone really uses the term anymore, but I certainly remember it, the Silicon Roundabout and London more widely. Yet, I think it's important to recognise there's a thriving fintech ecosystem across the UK, fed by talent from high quality universities based all over the country. And ultimately, that perception informs investment and staffing decisions and leads to a really inefficient allocation of resources.
Yes.
And regional fintech clusters are underrepresented in terms of industry influence and input into national policy relative to the quality of talent and businesses in those regions. So I think it's important that we give exposure to these various clusters to support that delivery of investment capital. And we've seen a lot of work happening with the FinTech Growth Fund. We also know that investment in fintech did drop last year, but it dropped everywhere.
Yes.
And now that we're seeing that grow again, which is fantastic. So I think there's still a lot of challenges from a funding perspective, but we're seeing things moving in the right direction again. And coupled with activities such as the Mansion House Accords last year, and the drive to get more pension funds investing into UK startups in particular, but more startups in general, but specifically into UK fintech, I think the future's looking bright.
Fantastic. You mentioned talent in our interviews or introductory interviews. David and I have been surprised as to some of the comments we've heard. SMIT has put together a database called the Fintech Pathfinder, in which we look at fintech companies around the world that have had at least one fundraising, but which are emphatically not listed. So they're companies of the future rather than the present. And we've identified about 3,000 names, of which about 1/5 or 700 or so are in the United Kingdom. And from memory, I think there are 60 in Liverpool. David, do you remember how many there were when we spoke to Liverpool?
It's around that number.
Yes. In other words, there's a cluster up there on the Mersey about which very little has been heard so far. But they've clearly got the talent up there that they need, which gets us to challenge number 3, talent. If you had to ascribe a number to that, what would it be?
I'd go with the 3 on that one. I think it's an interesting problem, talent. I think despite the UK's world-class university sector, demand from both fintech companies and financial institutions for specialist technology talent still far exceeds supply. And obviously those needs keep changing. Just 2 years ago, there was no such thing as an AI prompt engineer. right? So it's quite fascinating how that changes. But I think coupled with that, students aren't really often familiar with the career opportunities presented by the UK fintech sector. And universities frequently have insufficient information on fintech employers' hiring needs to tailor their course programs accordingly. And there's ultimately, what does it even mean to work in fintech? What is the right qualification? Are you an engineer? Are you in sales? Are you in risk? Are you in marketing? I think we often focus very much on the technologists, but there's a world beyond just tech when it comes to financial services. And businesses end up filling roles with ill-fitting candidates. There's a deficit of specialized talent, which squanders an opportunity to create high-income, tech-based employment nationwide. And I really do genuinely believe that the widening gap between the demand for technology skills and the UK's talent pipeline needs to be addressed. That's why I launched an organisation a few years back called Code Untapped to try to help solve part of this problem. And our industry must radically improve its collaboration with academia if we are to ensure we have the skills that are needed to maintain our world-leading position in fintech and drive forward the industry's next chapter. We can't just keep hiring ex-technologists from banks, although I was an ex-technologist from a bank. So, we need a new way to develop and train people in these skills. We haven't yet hit on that. I think we've seen some great examples. Atom Bank's activities in the north have been really interesting. The way they work with the university sector to develop early stage talent is something we should all be looking at, I think, personally. So there's great things happening on the horizon, but I still think there's a lot more we can do.
Thank you. The fourth challenge you mentioned in our last discussion was trade barriers and constraints on international trade, which may limit the opportunities for fintech firms. Where does that fit in your ranking of challenges?
Well, I'll put that one as a 3. I think the growth of the UK fintech sector is constrained by the UK being a significantly smaller addressable market than the US. Companies will frequently launch in the UK, attracted by the benefits of its financial ecosystem, UK standards, and English law. But to significantly scale the sector beyond those limits imposed by domestic market size, we need a real effective export strategy, which has been lacking to date. I think we've been good at exporting best practice, which we've seen with open banking. So we led the world on open banking. We developed APIs, systems, approaches, which everyone else then copied and changed. And now you find a lot of that open banking talent has now moved abroad and is working as consultants to develop that further in other territories. But we didn't export that technology, right? It was poached. That's a big difference between those two things. And I think with open finance, and this again has been why this has been so important, we have an opportunity to really set the scene for that. I think we should be looking to set the international standards for open finance, ensuring that our companies are building against those APIs from day one, so that when the rest of the world adopts those standards, we have a global ecosystem that we can plug straight into, and to not just export our knowledge, but also have our companies able to take advantage of financial services exports digitally on a global scale.
Yes. And finally, challenge number 5 is collaboration, which you've clearly done a lot of work to address with your task forces and working groups.
So I'd have to go with a 4 on that one. I think protagonists across the fintech industry in government, academia, and educational institutions, financial circles, and the companies themselves have really been operating in silos and not communicating enough. Fragmentation and the lack of connectivity have been a persistent challenge for the sector. The data sets relating to different financial products each sit in their own separate walled gardens, with each environment siloed off from the next. In this specific way, the situation is really quite reminiscent to the US tech sector in the late 1990s, when significant innovation was taking place, but companies were focused and solving problems within their own verticals. And we've seen it in social media. We saw it with telecoms in the UK. I often say open banking is akin to telecoms local loop unbundling for broadband, right? But promoting standardization and data sharing would enable technology providers to more easily engage across the entire financial services industry. And as you can see, I truly believe in this. Our coalitions are an exercise in cross-industry collaboration. And one of the number one things that kept coming out of the work and the feedback from our coalition partners was the opportunity to work in a neutral venue with potential competitors. I believe competitors should be able to collaborate to drive forwards innovation. I think it's important. And people saw that through the work of this last coalition. And that's why, again, this task force that we're leading is so important, because, again, there's a cross-cutting cross-section of industry players taking part in that, all with the goal of advancing innovation in the UK, which is just fantastic. So we fully intend for this task force to be a vehicle for much greater collaboration, and therefore to become a major facilitator for the next chapter of financial innovation in the UK.
Yes, thank you. You've been very generous and very wide-ranging with your answer to our 4 questions. So my 5th and final question is very simple. Is there anything we've missed that you think we should discuss?
Is there anything we've missed? No, I think we've covered pretty much everything. I just think the one thing I will say is we should be more confident in the UK. As the UK, we should be more confident in our digital sector.
Yes.
In our tech sector, particularly the fintech sector. We punch way above our weight. We talk about industrial trade strategy, and we focus on things like fishermen and car builders, which is great, right? But financial services is the biggest single contributor to the UK economy. And off the back of that, fintech is the thing that drives the innovation in that sector. Fintech in the UK was second number one it was second destination for venture capital investment globally, behind the US. And we're ahead of, I think, something like the next 26 countries in Europe combined or something.
Yeah, that's with our FinTech Pathfinder findings.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's absolutely astonishing. We should be not only investing in, but doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on fintech in the UK as a growth strategy for the next industrial revolution, right? That's what we should really be looking to do. So we should be proud of it, and we should be supporting it with everything we have.
Fantastic. Ez, thank you very much indeed for your time. This has been a wonderful interview, and it's a great start to our FinTech Atlas. Thank you. Thank you, Alex, as well.
Thank you. Real pleasure. Really enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing the article.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.